Dharma teachers as a life guide. As a beginning student a long time ago, just starting out in the Dharma practice, I had little idea where I was going with my practice, and that eventually became a problem. Now, when I first began in the late 1950s and the early 1960s, many of the Tibetan teachers, especially in later years, that were around spoke little to no English. So in a very real sense, they were refugees resulting from the diaspora in Tibet uh, when they all fled due to the invading Chinese communists. Now, in my case, I came from more of a Zen sensibility, since really early on, the Zen Buddhists in America were more prominent than any other kind, at least to me, as far as I know. And when I first saw the Tibetan shrines, they seemed everything opposite from the bare teakwood floors and the other minimalist furnishings of the Zen Buddhists. In fact, the Tibetan shrines were more like the Catholic Church in which I was raised, which is kind of funny. And the church I was trying to get away from. There were brocades and statues and vestments and a language and I didn't understand, like church Latin, but I had to learn, which I had to learn church Latin because I was an altar boy. Anyway, it was a lot to soak up, but that just happened to be where I found Rinpoche. And my particular Dharma teacher, over all these years, has had us do all of our practice not in English, but in Tibetan. And Tibetan's, as many of you will know, a non-European style language with a strange Asian script that I had to learn to read. So, and this is not to mention that Rinpoche, the Lama that I have worked with for 30-some years, lived 800 miles from where I live here in Big Rapids, Michigan. So I only saw him rarely. Sure, there were some Western Dharma students here in the Midwest back in that, in the early 60s and so forth. But for the most part, they didn't know any more than I did, and that was very little. And to top it off, somewhere, the students I knew, all of us, had gotten the idea that we were not supposed to talk to each other about or share anything about our Dharma practice, which decades later turned out to be just misinformation. The kind of secrecy, not talking about turns out to be true only for the personal instructions given by a guru to a disciple in the more or most advanced stages of practice. In fact, in Tibet, as I found out from traveling to Tibet a couple of times, whole colleges debate and discuss the preliminary practices constantly. So there we were, smiling and giving each other the thumbs up about our practice, but saying nothing and privately trying to figure it all out on our own. Now that was what I would call a big mistake. So, I wasn't somewhere out in the natural solitude of a cave meditating, but I certainly was alone as alone can be. Now, fast forward 45 years to now, and the Dharma generally is much more known, or at least known of, and it's more accepted now than it was back then. But there's one thing that hasn't changed all that much, and that is the fact that each of us is alone in trying to work our practice, trying to do our practice. When all the hand holding is done, there we are, just out there in the middle of our life with our Dharma practice, trying to figure out how to get enlightened. And the most challenging part of it all is that spiritual achievement of any kind, and at least of the non-dualistic, what's called realization of the more advanced Buddhist teachings, that's by definition not something we can beforehand know anything at all about. You know, as the Venerable Chogyam Trungpa used to say, your guess is as good as mine. Now, Dharma practice does have a roadmap, but as I would say, it's not illustrated. Advanced stages of meditation are described in texts, but then those very words are, it is said that they're unable to express the results of what's called non-dual meditation. You can't put it into words. It's what's called ineffable. So we can't just open up a Dharma book and see photos of realization. Our expectations as to why we are meditating are pretty much a shot in the dark. Yet often they're the only thing we have to go on, and we all have them. We don't know what greater awareness is like, feels like, looks like, not until we actually have it. So I am getting to my point here, and here it is. My point is that there are some very definite hurdles to learning Dharma. Not only way back then, 40, 50 years ago, but today as well. And some of them are just the fact that the Dharma is still very new in this country. And unlike the Tibetans who are raised and steeped in the Dharma from birth onward, many of us are not even familiar or comfortable with the notion of, or the concept of rebirth. That concept alone is a huge learning curve for most people. And the teachings are all in Tibetan, and the mantras are all in Sanskrit, and the list, goes on and on. So anyway, here I was, sitting on my little cushion in a corner each day, wondering where this practice was leading, or when would I get some results? I mean, after all, what is meditation? Of course, I knew how to learn it from teachers and books, but, what is it? What are the end results of meditation actually like? I didn't know because I had never had any clear results up to that time. I was still just learning, and I learned and I learned and I learned, but still, I never actually learned. Now, I could go on and on with these diagnostics that I'm giving you here, but I'm going to spare you. The upshot of what I'm saying is that all of this is easier, totally easier, if we have a guide, if we have someone to help us over the hurdles that all of us are going to experience when we start out trying to do Dharma practice. After all, that's the whole idea of what lineage is all about. A chain of friends that carefully practice, certify, and pass on the authentic Dharma instructions from generation to generation. We wouldn't dream of doing brain surgery on ourselves. And the spiritual equivalent requires someone with the ability to actually help us. Someone who already has some authentic realization. And let's not be confused. Authentic realization is not enlightenment. But simply put, a teacher, in order to teach us, must have themselves realized how to negotiate the particular impasse that we may find ourselves at the moment. Now, they have to have done that successfully, and they have to be able and willing to help others, and to help beginners achieve the same kind of realization that they have, and they're there to point out how. And something that's not understood, I don't believe, is that there's a whole lot to the Dharma that is purely mechanical, as in, how do we do this properly? And there, at least in this country, there are not enough hands-on, experienced Dharma folks, teachers, around to assist all of us with our learning. And, this is, as I see it anyway, a problem. And it doesn't help at all that we're shy about asking. I like the Christian saying that you have to go to meet your maker. Now, here I'm saying that at least we each have to go halfway. We have to reach out and request help and request guidance. And again, from, obviously from someone who knows, who's authentic. We should know intuitively which Dharma teachers speak to us so that we grasp what they're saying. Obviously, those are the ones to contact about guiding us. And that's exactly what I did. Of all the many gurus, teachers, yogis, etc., that I met early on, because I went around looking, it was this one Tibetan Rinpoche that I just naturally got. It just responded to him. And even after one meeting, and that meeting was very short, all I wanted was more. Soon after meeting Rinpoche, Margaret, my wife, and I bundled up our whole family, and we drove 800 miles on one of the coldest days of the year, the week after Christmas. And we showed up at Rinpoche's doorstep in Woodstock, in the mountains above Woodstock, New York, totally unannounced. We had such confidence in Rinpoche that we just jumped in the car, pretty much, and just went there. So I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but I am telling you what I did. And perhaps I'm saying that we each have to do something. I mean, rather than simply wait forever to be rescued from samsara, for some teacher to come along. And I think the dream is some look at us and say, I know you. You belong to me. I'm your teacher. That's not likely to happen. It happens in a roundabout way, but not so directly, because no one's coming to get us unless we can go and meet them at least halfway. We have to be ready. You know the old saying, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And that is really true. So ultimately, we each have to enlighten ourselves, and believe me, that's difficult enough. Then there are many kinds of Buddhism. Vajrayana Buddhism, in which I practice, is entirely built around a student working with an experienced teacher, someone who actually knows what we are trying to learn. It's like sitting there with our offering bowl upside down and expecting to learn. That's not going to work. We have to turn the bowl upward, reach out, and receive what guidance we can. Without a Dharma teacher like Rinpoche, my life would be very different today. He has been my guide.